Immigration challenges. So we have students that are still trying to get visas. It was a big issue in the fall, and it is continuing to be an issue now. Even now, we have students that are coming in, and we could have students arriving up until February 5th. That's the last day that students can be able to enter the country on the immigration documents that they have in hand now for this semester. We have some students that are going to be distance education. That's required some different coding. And then again, we could have some late arrivals that will be coming.
February 8th, I will correct that slide. I appreciate that. So February 5th was an incorrect date. February 8th is the very last day for students to enter the country. Thank you. Coursework access. So I'll get into this topic a little bit. As I mentioned before, if students do need to join from their home country, they are often joining at very odd hours. We have a lot of brand new Chinese students here in the IAP program, and those students, we try to keep them in classes that end before noon, and that's often very challenging to just find options that are available, so that because they do have a 12-hour time difference. Textbooks have been very challenging. So if you have a way to provide a digital book or a link, something like that, so that students would be able to actually get their book digitally, it certainly makes it a lot easier. In many countries around the world, it's very difficult for them to get their textbooks. So we've been trying to share digital options if those are available. For many students, Teams is inaccessible, and so we have been communicating with students over Zoom instead. Also, there are many websites that are blocked. One of those websites is Google, if you're in China. So that has been a huge challenge. I know that for the Student Success Center, they generally are holding their tutoring appointments via Teams, but they also have Zoom licenses available. Another point on the connectivity bullet there, Blackboard Collaborate is something that students often have had real difficulty with as well. And the reason is that Blackboard has a link to Chromium, I think it is. We've learned a lot more about all of these inner workings over the past fall semester. And so it's actually connected with Google. And so if a student is back in China, they probably are going to need to use a VPN in order just to connect to Blackboard. And so that causes a huge problem because the VPN dramatically slows down your connection. And so that's what causes the video to then not be very reliable for students. We got professors to move over to Zoom, which works much more easily. If students are studying from China, the VPN isn't necessary, so that has worked well as a solution. But then also we had some students who just had to give up basically, and they had to withdraw from the semester and hope to try again when they could be face-to-face. So yes, connectivity has been a very big issue. Medical documentation in native language. So this is something just to point out the fact that if a student is having a medical issue and they need to miss class for a totally understandable reason, it might be impossible for you to really verify that. Feel free, if you would like to send something that looks like a medical excuse over to me. We do have, on the IAP staff, we do have native speakers of Chinese. You can just check and make sure that that is indeed what you're looking at. Linguistic challenges. So I think someone mentioned before that you're not having as much interaction in English in the classroom. You're having generally a classroom that contains less interaction because you're not sitting next to others and able to have those informal conversations. And that absolutely has a bearing on students' ability to improve their English proficiency. They are missing those opportunities for conversations with instructors and peers in many cases. Often a casual conversation with a peer can clarify something that they wouldn't normally need to ask the instructor about. And so I would encourage you right away to get students to share information and to just make sure that they are meeting friends within your class if at all possible, so that they can communicate with one another and keep that channel of communication open between peers and not just between you as the instructor and the peers. Also, if you're in a face-to-face class, I think we've all experienced trying to even speak to a native speaker with a mask on and having it be very difficult to understand. And so certainly that's even more an issue when you're trying to understand someone in a language that isn't your first language. So that has made it a big challenge. There is a shield that you can get actually that you can wear instead of the mask, which is just a clear plastic shield. And from what I understand, it's possible to do that as long as you're far enough away from the other students in your class so that students can see your mouth clearly, and that would be something that would certainly ease communication between you and the students. So cultural challenges. One thing that's going to be challenging for students who are studying from their home country is national holidays that are happening. So when a national holiday happens, I think we all know things kind of shut down over Christmas. It's really difficult to get things done at that time. You know, the internet may be a little bit more cluttered. It might be, you might have a poor connection. You might need to travel to go and see your loved ones. All of these sorts of things are going to happen for Chinese students around February 12th to 17th, because that is the period of time we'll be celebrating Chinese New Year. And so it's just something to be aware of if you have one or more Chinese students in your class and they're studying from their home country. Also, it's important to understand that the U.S. was perceived as really not taking precautions, and I mean, you know, it certainly is evident from our numbers compared to other countries around the world that may actually be true. And so for that reason, there's certainly a little bit of anxiety among a lot of international students here who are residing at USC about actually going into the classroom. So something to know. And then just discomfort with in-person coursework as a result is very, very common.
Let's see, personal, definitely seeing increased rates of anxiety. And that's not just internationals, that's across the board for all students. Not just students, I think we can say that faculty and staff, I mean, 2020 was a hard year and 2021 has come out swinging when it comes to stress. So I think that we're definitely seeing increased rates of anxiety. We're seeing some financial stress, again, whether that is to the GAs, TAs, or just impacts around the world. I mean, our students are paying for their tuition, and the global economy is really going through some major impacts right now. And so our students may be suffering from some of that financial stress. And then issues relating to isolation. Red flags are not always evident. Now, we've always had problems with students that have been, you know, depending on what's going on, whether it's homesickness, whether it's culture shock, whether it's much more serious mental health issues. There's always been an issue of a handful of students being isolated and kind of not participating. And we have programs to support those students, and we rely on, you know, teachers reporting that, and we reach out to any student that we hear there. But it's more challenging now because these students are not face-to-face in front of the teachers. So if you were going to see a student walk through your room 3 times a week, they were going to be a very good, they started out as a very good student, and then you start noticing some changes in maybe their hygiene and maybe their behavior in class. Like, you're going to spot some red flags that you would see beyond just maybe some changes in grades. But if those students aren't in front of you or their friends or their peers, we might miss some cases. They're not logging in and interacting. You can miss these things. So that's a real challenge, and we're definitely seeing an increase in that, and we're definitely trying to figure out the best way to help support our students that are dealing with that.
I'm going to share a few classroom tips. The first tip is simply expect legitimate coursework access issues. Make sure you're providing time for students to get their texts. You can use the library service for getting course materials available digitally. So feel free to make sure that you know about that. And the other professors in your departments also know about that, other faculty. Make sure that you avoid using course materials that are delivered through Google Docs, through YouTube in particular, because YouTube is also banned in China, unfortunately. Microsoft Online, Microsoft products, and Google products are both, unfortunately, banned in China in particular. Students can use a VPN to access these things, and if it's a static text, then normally students can see it and they can interact with it. But when you start using video, it becomes really challenging, and it's much less likely that students will be able to see that. So it's just important to know that, and to make sure that you ask students whether they can see and access and utilize those course materials. Best thing to do is just ask. It's hard to make any assumptions here. Some students who have been studying from China have been totally fine, for example. They've got a really strong VPN, and they're in an area that doesn't have a lot of interference, and they're able to access things much more easily. But it just depends on the individual student. Make sure that you escalate any technical difficulties if you see them in the class. Make sure you note in the syllabus ways to actually get help resolving these, and we'll have some context at the end of the presentation that can be provided as well. Make sure that you, as I mentioned before, you just poll your students early, so you find out about where they are and what they're dealing with, what their specific situation is, because every student is an individual. We've just noticed a range of different possible challenges that students have had. Make sure you provide and encourage face-to-face opportunities to communicate with the remote students in particular, especially if you have the ability to have an office hour early on the semester and say, this is a requirement, give them a little quiz grade or something and get them to actually meet with you face-to-face so that you just have that personal individual connection. And encouraging the same interaction among your students will be really helpful as well. Anything we can do to mitigate the isolation and to make sure that you're really meeting with students and understanding what what your expectations are and their understanding what your expectations are. Those are really, really important to just make sure the semester gets off on the right foot. Within the first few class sessions, do consider pairing students and having them ask and respond to questions about themselves, something really low stakes for them to talk about, just so that they can start to have that interaction with one another. If you can break them into small groups if you're in an online environment and just get them talking to one another, this is really going to improve your the relationships within your classroom. Also consider assigning early group assignments where you have very clearly defined roles. Students know what where they stand within that assignment, but really just to facilitate that interaction among the classmates in your classroom. Use and encourage discussion boards when delivering asynchronously. Probably many of you are using this. Just encouraging any kind of peer-to-peer interaction will be really helpful for students. I'm sure you've all heard that it's very important to record if you're doing an online class your first few class sessions because students may end up registering late or they may experience connectivity issues. On that same note, we mentioned before that students can enter the country anywhere between now and February 8th, and so for that reason students may want to switch modality at some point, or they may be signed up for a face-to-face class and they have to access those materials in an asynchronous fashion or look at those recordings, that kind of thing, until they can actually physically be here. So it's just something to be aware of, and it's something to include in that poll at the beginning of the semester so that you know what your students are experiencing this semester. Consider avoiding major assignments during those major holidays. Of course, this is going to depend entirely on your class and who the students are. I only mentioned the public holiday in China that will be the most disruptive for students. But again, this can be part of the poll where you find out what the major things could be that would prevent them from being able to easily study. Expect stress, show compassion, be supportive. These are all very important things to do at any point, but we know that students have increased anxiety levels right now, and so this certainly is going to be especially important this spring. And then also, when in doubt, refer out. In a moment, I'm going to show you a slide with some things, some individuals that you should feel very comfortable communicating with. If you have any concerns, if you notice anything that we could perhaps help with, within either International Student Services or within the IAP, and then beyond universities' resources as well.